Hi and welcome back to the AHF. I'm going to talk to you today about the cold steel range of polypropylene swords. Now I've got this one here, the katana, or basically a bokken, to show you. I don't have any of the European range, and that is because they aren't worth buying, and that's why I've never owned them. I have, however, used them, trained with them. A few of our members have actually bought them, some of our students, so I can tell you a bit about them and why we don't recommend them. Just very quickly why I do have the bokken and why you see it coming up in videos. Well, the reason is that these days the HEMA community has actually got access to quite a lot of very good training weapons, whether it is synthetic or steel. Whereas trying to get something representing a katana is actually much more difficult, and that's because there just aren't that many people that spar with something resembling a katana. So cold steel is good in that regard, and I'm going to go on to that a bit later. But initially, obviously, we wanted to talk about the European stuff and why I don't think it's really worth bothering with. Well, when you look at, going back to the comparison, the Japanese range, they're quite sort of slender training swords for kind of, hollowed out polypropylene. Whereas the European stuff is incredibly bulky. If you compare it to, say, a Night Shop or a Red Dragon synthetic sword or Purple Heart or Black Fencer, it's really bulky. It looks like something out of, Warhammer. It's at the game, so it's just huge. And it actually does feel like it looks as well, despite the fact that the total weights are not too bad. The mass distribution is just crazy. They do feel like you're wielding a big club, and they do hit, as a result, very, very hard. The only really thing you could say in their favour is that quite a lot of suppliers keep them in stock, so you could order one today and have it sort of, in a day or two's time. So that's in its favour. But why are you buying it? Okay, it's very, very cheap. It has a slight advantage over wood in that it's not going to chip and break so easily as the wood stuff will, but in every other regard, it is just awful. They handle terribly. They look awful. They're not remotely safe to be using in a sparring scenario. The katana, which excuse me, the katana is an awful lot lighter, the bokken model, and it still hits quite hard. This hits a lot harder than most, say, Black Fencer synthetics do. So I just don't think they really have a place. Maybe a few years ago, before access to sort of a lot of synthetic stuff happened, they had a place. And for weapon types that are harder to find, like the katana, for a sparring model, they're still quite useful. But for the European range, no. And then on to how we find them generally in sparring, moving past the fact that I don't recommend the European range. The first thing you want to know is they're quite pointy. When you get them, they actually come to a real nasty point that you really don't want to be keeping on there, so you need to rub that down. So I usually just put it on a grinding wheel, but you could do it with sandpaper or a file. So just take the point off it, and also the way they presumably cast them or injection mold them, they have seam lines, and the seams run along the edge and the back of the blades, and those seams are also very sharp to the level that they're sharp enough that they could cut through skin and fabric. So again, if you're going to use it with a training partner or just full stop, I'd recommend just smoothing that down a little bit. I usually just take sandpaper to the edge or a file, and then a minute's work and you've got a smooth edge which works. So that's sort of two issues, the seams and the point, which you need to deal with if you're going to use it for sort of partnered exercise or any kind of sparring. The other thing that people might want to talk about is, will they stand up to steel? Well, like most cold steel stuff, it's not always the most attractive looking, but is usually very robust, and this is no exception to the rule. You see this one here, it's got a few chips and marks and scuffs on it. Well, this has been used against steel training swords. You'll see in our sparring videos that this is often used against things like rapiers and a range of other weapons, and that's the most damage it takes from steel blades. So you might want to rub that down occasionally, again, so that if it comes into contact with cloth or skin that it doesn't cut. But yes, you could use these against steel blades and they will hold up to it, provided you don't mind some chips and burrs and stuff like that. So the advantages of they also flex test. You should know that they don't flex much at all. If you get hit with this on a thrust, it just will barely flex at all. So it does hit very hard on the thrust. Unlike, say, the Black Fencer range or the Red Dragon range or Purple Heart, which have nice flex on the thrust. So that's another disadvantage. you've got to think of this more like a replacement to a wooden bokken or a wooden waster in European stuff, rather than any kind of match-up to, say, the Red Dragon range or Purple Heart or Black Fencer. So I think that's all I want to say. Plus points is, yeah, it's off the shelf, they're very, very cheap, and they're very, very robust, but the European range in particular handles like an absolute dog, so just don't bother. The Japanese stuff is better, it's reasonable. Again, you're not going to say it handles particularly well, but it doesn't handle as badly as the European stuff, and at least it's cheap, accessible, and usable. So there you go, my recommendation. Definitely for the European stuff, don't bother. Thanks for watching.